It's clear that Magnus is convinced of one of several things. Either that, so to me, there's like two main theories of what Magnus might be thinking. Obviously, like, it is clear that Magnus thinks that Hans like is a cheater. What does that phrase mean? Is a cheater? Does that mean he thinks he cheated against him in St. Louis, or is Magnus forming his opinion based on past tournaments, and he thinks that Hans has somehow discredited himself by cheating prolifically over the board and online previously? I think that is the more probable theory, if I had to speculate, is that Magnus believes that Hans cheated much more prolifically online than Hans admitted to in the interview. And I'm pretty confident that Magnus believes that Hans has cheated over the board before. Maybe not in St. Louis, but definitely before. Now, we can agree that if Hans cheated over the board previously, then that does call into question, obviously, the idea of inviting him to like top tournaments. That should hypothetically disqualify somebody from getting invites. But obviously there's no proof. But it seems that what Magnus did today is pretty consistent with his like pattern of behavior in St. Louis. Magnus feels incredibly strongly about this, and you know, he's being consistent in his conviction. Do I trust Magnus's intuition? Well, in general, yes. I mean, I think we all kind of trust Magnus's intuition. That's why he's getting the light of day for as long as he is. If anybody other than Magnus was doing this, I think that person wouldn't be taken seriously at all. Catching someone red-handed is the likelihood of that is vanishingly small. So with cheating, proof exists on kind of a spectrum. Well, imagine somebody played a tournament and they're rated 1600, and every single move they made in that tournament corresponds to the Stockfish top line. Is that proof that that person cheated? Well, most people, I feel like your intuition probably is to say no, they just could have played a perfect tournament. But at the same time, you understand that that's ridiculous. That is as close as it comes to proof, but you didn't catch that person red-handed. So you have to understand that catching someone in the act of cheating over the board almost never happens. The only kind of proof or semi-proof that's realistically procurable is the record of someone's moves and, you know, the correspondent, you know, the correlation to the computer's choices. Now, we can agree that if Hans cheated over the board previously, then that does call into question, obviously, the idea of inviting him to like top tournaments. That should hypothetically disqualify somebody from getting invites. But obviously there's no proof. Kenneth Reagan said that Hans never cheated from statistical analysis in the last 2 years, yesterday on CCT stream. So here's my problem with, I do trust Kenneth Reagan. I think that is a major argument in favor of saying that Hans didn't cheat over the board, case closed. But here's the other thing. Cheating has evolved from let me make all of the Stockfish top moves to much more complicated methods. For example, let me play the first 20 moves in a mediocre fashion. Let me play on my own. Let me get a slightly worse position or an equal position. And then let me use the engine at 6 or 7 points in the next 25 moves, right? I feel like that's virtually undetectable. The problem with Kenneth Reagan's algorithm, and I've heard this criticism made of him by people in the know, is that it's a little bit too predicated on the idea that somebody who's cheating is just going to play the top move every time, which is nowhere near how a top player would cheat if they're smart. So I think a huge question right now, and the ball is still in Hans's court in this regard, is for him to clarify the record on his online cheating. I think in terms of putting more facts on the table and realistically asking for stuff to be revealed, the only thing we could realistically ask for that would somewhat enrich our view of the situation is for Hans to address the chess.com statement and to specifically clarify, like, what is his official position on the amount of times that he cheated online. Well, there's nothing to tell behind the scenes. I have no inside information. We could get him on stream. Hans has not responded to the chess.com statement as far as I know. Not a list of all of the games. Okay, that's pretty draconian. Like, you know, address whether he misrepresented the amount of times that he cheated, whether it was only twice or whether it was more than that. And I have a pretty good feeling that it's more than twice. I have a feeling that Hans might have underrepresented the amount of times that he cheated online, and if so, I think it would be really important for him to clarify that. Because otherwise, the situation becomes more complicated. Because you can always then say, oh, well, Hans not only cheated, but then he lied about it, So it's important for him to clarify his record.